Welcome guys. This is going to be a crash course in Photoshop for game artists for texturing purposes. I'm loading up the latest Photoshop. I think it's 2021. My Photoshop's going to look a little bit different than yours, and that's okay. This is my recent files. You can see I've been working on a bunch of personal stuff, uploading avatars and yada yada, but this is where you start. Over here on the left you can say create new, and you're going to get the new document palette. And I'm just going to create something temporary, or just, you know, something square, I guess. 1024 by 1024 width and height. I'm working for game, so I'm doing pixels. Like if you were doing photos and maybe for print, you might do inches, centimeters, yada yada. You can name your document here. I'm just going to call this test, or maybe we'll just call it crash course. And you can change your background color here if you want. You can also save a preset. If it's save preset, it doesn't matter. Create, and we're going to go into this new square document. And now I'm going to be throwing a lot of things at you here. Like I said, this is going to be a crash course. So one of the things I initially like to do when I get in here is hit Control-Alt-0, and it looks like we're already at full screen, but if we were zoomed in, you hit Control-Alt-0, and this is the actual size of the document. It's not zoomed in at all. So Control-Alt-0 is to make it 100%, and I'm on a pretty large monitor here, so it looks rather small. All your tools are over here on the toolbar on the very far left. See, we got a move tool, we got selection boxes of different kinds. They call them the marquee tool. Polygonal lasso tool, this is a good one for selecting specific things. Magic wand, crop, eyedropper tool, brush, yada yada, and we'll get into some of these more specifically, but this is kind of where all your usual tools are. So let's go ahead and pick a brush. You can also hit B on your keyboard to pick a brush. I use spacebar. If you hold spacebar, it'll pan, and if you do Control spacebar and drag, it'll zoom. The other thing I want to note, see, I got pressure sensitivity here on this brush. I'm using a Wacom tablet for pressure sensitivity. I do not recommend a mouse. One thing you need to make sure you have turned on, and I have a couple of different pins on here, I'm on this Pro Pen 2, is under Calibrate. You want to make sure that you're using Windows Ink, and that's how Photoshop knows through Windows to use pressure sensitivity. Basically, if this is off, you won't have pressure sensitivity. And I have two different Wacom pens. There we go. And this one, I switched pens. This one doesn't have pressure sensitivity, and it's just for my sake. Some features inside of Windows and Google Chrome don't like Windows Ink. They do weird things. They try to treat it like a touchpad, like it's a finger scrolling or something like that. So I turn Windows Ink off for my usual day-to-day scrolling. And then when I'm in Photoshop, I have another pen with its own settings with Windows Ink on. Okay. I'm gonna hit M on my keyboard for that marquee select. I'm gonna click and hold here, change to the rectangle, and I can drag a box in here. Okay, and then if I want to fill that, maybe if you're coming from MS Paint, you remember the paint bucket tool, and you can find the paint bucket tool where this little gradient is. You click and hold, and there is a paint bucket tool in here, and you can fill by clicking. Paint bucket tool, I don't use it hardly ever. The other way to do this is just to hit Alt Backspace is the hotkey for basically your fill or your paint bucket tool, you can just alt backspace and it'll fill that whole selection. If you don't have anything selected, so I can do Control D to deselect, and then alt backspace to fill, that'll fill that layer. That's how I might hit. This is probably a good time to talk about colors. You see these little swatches down here. I have a black and white swatch here. If I click on that first swatch, the one in front, it's called the foreground color. I'll get a color picker and I can choose my color. Ooh, make it red. 255 red's the best color, right? Boom. Yeah. I'm awake. If I hit X on my keyboard, that'll swap my two colors. If you look at swatches over here, they're flip-flopping back and forth. So I could hit X to switch my color, and then alt backspace to fill that again. Now, probably a good time to talk about the layers. Now, your user interface is probably set up differently than mine. I'm usually pretty particular about where I like my palettes. But if you cannot find any of these particular palettes that I'm talking about, you can go to Window up top, and here are all of the available palettes inside of Photoshop. Okay, so if I was missing, say, the brushes, even though they're all docked over here, you can turn these on. In fact, I'm going to expand my panels over here, and I don't want you to freak out. I have a lot of stuff over here. Okay. We should just go through the menus real quick. File, save as. Let's go ahead and do that. Save as. I'm going to go to my active drive, demo, and I'm going to create a folder in here. There we go. Call this Photoshop Crash Course. Open that and then save that PSD right there. That's how you save. Let's see what else is important in here. For the most part, that's it. You might find some extra little scripts in here. Sometimes I use scripts. There are a couple of special cool things in here. Batch processing files, that's a fun thing. So if you ever need to change the size of 100 photos, you can create a batch and then tell it to run on a folder, and it'll take all 100 of those folders, or I'm sorry, all 100 of those photos, and it'll resize them for you. It's a quick way to do that. Edit, you got your undo, redo. There's that, I guess, fill. And yeah, let's open up some more things. We have cut, copy. Stroke is an interesting one. You can create a selection here and then say edit stroke, and then you can choose, maybe we'll do 20 pixels. That black. Okay. We can do strokes. Image is where we make a lot of adjustments to really the document, and so image size will take your whole image and resize it, so it'll squash it or stretch it depending if you're going larger or smaller. So I can show you what that looks like. The hotkey for that is Control-Alt-I to change your image size. So if I said we're going to take this up to, I don't know, let's just go to 4,000, and just on one axis here, and you can see both of these aren't changing at the same time. So if I wanted to keep it a square, I'd hit that little link next to it, and I could say 4,000, and it just made my photo bigger. So I'm going to hit Control-0, that's actual pixel size, or you can hit Control-0 to frame the whole document. A couple other things in here that are kind of fun, like Puppet Warp. It's like, I don't know how to explain that. It's like using pins to pin parts of your image and stretch it in weird ways. Kind of a fun one. Crop I use sometimes, but let's real quick talk about that canvas size. Canvas size will actually crop the document if you bring it in, or it'll expand the document if you take it outward. So if I say 5,000 and hit enter, you see it expanded my document. It didn't change, it didn't squash the original image at all, it just expanded. Now, I just Control-Z'd that. If I were to Control-Alt-C is the hotkey for canvas size. If I were to go inward and say, let's take this back down to 1024 by 1024, and you can change these little corners depending on the direction you want to crop it toward. I'm just going to crop it into the center, so it'll pull all the corners inward into that 1024. I'll say OK, it's telling me that it's going to crop some things. I just say cool, proceed, and it basically cropped that whole document. These are layer controls. We haven't talked about the layer panel yet. We'll get there, but you can do new layers. This is basically all the slow ways to do layers. Type. I guess there's I feel like this is a new menu, but there's a whole bunch of settings in here now for typography. This is the select menu, so if you ever forget any of your hotkeys for selecting, you can find those in the select menu up top, like select all, deselect, inverse your select, that one's real helpful at times, invert selection, yeah. Color range, you can select by color, that's a really helpful one. So if you have a bunch of, I don't know, so if I have, zoom in here. So I have a bunch of colors in here. Oops. And then I do a select by color range. This little box comes up and I can basically eyedrop pick one of these colors and it'll select any one of those colors, whether it be white, black, and then if you have some variation in that color, you can kind of pull it in and out and change the fuzziness or the fall off of that selection. And so if I were to run it on, say, red, pick all that red, and then add some fuzziness so I get all the reds, and say OK, you see now I have a selection. That's what these little marching ants are. I have a selection of that, and I could go in here and paint into that selection if I wanted to. And you could see because of that fuzziness it didn't quite get everything, so I would have had to have turned that fuzziness up more to select all of that. That's a nice way to kind of restrict your painting in a way. Let's see, select. Another good one in here is to modify a selection. So if I were to go and use the marquee tool and do a box select in here like that, I could adjust that selection by going to modify, and you could do a border selection, which would turn it into kind of like a stroke like that. Undo that, select, modify, and you could expand your selection. So if you had a really complex selection and you just needed a little bit more, so actually let's take it back here. I'm gonna Control-Z. Let's relate that to this here. So I have a selection from that color range select. If I go select, modify, and then expand, I expand this by, I don't know, 30 pixels. You see it just expanded my whole selection a little bit. Phone's going off, it's telling me to wake up. And then I could paint that out. Control-D, deselect. Feather is a nice one, so if I had like a very hard selection like this, See, very hard selection. Do another one. And I go select, modify, feather. I can feather this selection, which will soften it. So I can feather it, soften it by 20 pixels. And now when I alt backspace, fill that, you see I get a much softer selection. Filters are, I don't know, there's all kinds of things in filters. So if we just run through some of these real quick. Maybe like blur is where you'll find your kind of master blur. Gaussian blur is kind of the typical blur command. You just turn it up and it'll blur either your selection or the whole image. It's a good one, so I'm going to blur all this. Maybe a little more. I'm going to say OK. That's a good filter. There's a lot of different kinds of blurs. Distort, so you get kind of into some effects here. So maybe we ripple, and you can see I can add some ripples. Change the ripple size to large. There we go. Hit OK. Lovely. Filters. Basically, these are effects. You can think of them as special effects. Sharpen, that's a good one. Sharpen. And the basic sharpen is just a real, I would say, shallow sharpen. It doesn't sharpen a whole lot. So if you want something really sharp, you kind of have to keep hitting sharpen. Another way to do that is whatever filter you run in here, to run your last filter repeatedly, you get a hotkey for run last filter, which would be Control F. So if I just keep mashing on Control F, you can see that that's now super sharp, right? Yeah, real sharp. Okay. Since we're talking kind of about effects here through menus, I think one I kind of missed was under the layer panel, and that is layer adjustments or fill layers. And so fill layers and layer adjustments get used a lot. If we just create like a new fill layer, we say solid color, this will create, like we were doing earlier with alt backspace, it'll just create a fill color. So you say OK, and I could choose any one of these colors. Yeah, we're going to go yellow. And then it created a fill that is also a layer. And so you see I'm starting to create layers over here in my layer panel. I can turn that on and off. But what's beneficial about this solid color layer is that at any time I can come over here and double click on that layer and edit that color if I wanted. That's a solid color layer. I'll go back to layers here. Adjustment layers. Sorry, let me open that up. Fill layer. You can do gradients. Patterns get used a lot. So if I do a pattern fill, as it's called, and then say OK, it'll bring up a library, and I have my own patterns in here, a bunch of different things, but you can run repeatable patterns in here. And this is something I do to grunge textures generally. So if I choose like this grunge here, I can change the scale of that to larger. You see it gets blurry when I do that, or I could take it down and you can see how it repeats. And so these are pattern fills, super helpful. You can also rotate the orientation of this pattern. I'll change this back to 100% so it stays nice and crisp. Change the angle to 0 and hit OK. And you see now I have a pattern fill over here. Turn that layer on and off, got a pattern fill. Layers. And we're going to go to adjustment layers. Now here's where you can kind of adjust levels, brightness, contrast. There's a bunch of kind of typical photo editing kinds of effects, if you will. And they call them adjustment layers. And now I'm pretty sure, let's see, layer style. No. There used to be a way in here to new long time ago. Man, I've almost never, haven't used them since, but you used to be able to run these effects without having to do an actual layer. Interesting. So now you can go to brightness contrast. So if we do a brightness contrast adjustment layer on here, you say OK. And now I have this layer over here. If I double click that, I can open up those settings. Oh, sorry. It opens up this properties window. Mine was already docked, so it didn't show up. I'll drag mine out. If I double click that, or close it, right? Double click. It brings up your properties, and I can change the brightness of this. I can also adjust contrast. I find the default brightness contrast to be a little bit, I don't know, simple, a little bit shallow. Like I just can't push the values as much as I really want to. And the legacy, if you use legacy here, it can be pushed a lot further. See, straight to gray, or really, really crunchy, right? Adjustment layers. So let's go do a couple more here. Like levels. Levels is kind of an advanced brightness contrast, if you will. It gives you a point. This histogram, these hills here, are basically all the values plotted on a graph for you, and you can cut them out, starting with your blacks. They call this crushing, crushing your blacks, or crush your whites the other direction, or you can push around that midpoint, or wash out the whole image either direction, and then crush them. And so this is kind of like a master cap. If you don't want anything over, I don't want any white values over 128-ish, then now my whole image is under 128 gray, and it's basing the brightness contrast off of that, or that levels off of that. Okay, it's a good one. Another one here, new layer adjustment, hue saturation. Use this one a lot. I'm gonna dock this little window here. Hue saturation, we have no colors here, so what I'm gonna do is check colorize, and this basically adds color into the image, and so I can choose, kind of push colors into it. I can saturate it, take the brightness down. This is really more helpful when you have a bunch of colors in here. So if I go back to, let's turn some of these layers off. I'll go back to my base image here. Hit B, and I'm gonna color some things. Let's do some colors. I actually have swatches here. Let's bring up some swatches. So I got red, I got yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta. And then I'm going to turn on my hue saturation layer up here, and I'm going to double click its icon and go back to the settings for it, the properties for that. And I'm going to turn off colorize. And here's all my colors. And now when I push this hue, it kind of shifts all the existing colors on that color wheel, where you can desaturate everything and then shift those colors. So hue saturation, super helpful. Gradient map is a really fun one. Let's turn our pattern on here. I'm going to go layer, new adjustment layer, and I'm going to do a gradient map. And what a gradient map does is it searches for black and white values, and I can replace any of those black and white values with a gradient. And so this is my gradient that I'm choosing. I have a bunch of different gradients in here. Expand this, and I can swap out those black and white colors for different gradient values. It's a fun one for if you have certain kind of themes you want to follow, or maybe like certain kinds of rust colors that you want to use, like that, or this one. It's a good way to kind of convert black and white information or black and white grunges into some grunge colors, maybe. Okay. I'm not going to talk about too much more up here. I think what I'm wanting to get into now is these layers. And so a couple things to know about the layer panel is that these eyeballs, obviously you can click them one by one, but if you click and drag through and turn them all off at once in one go, you can click and drag through here, or click and drag through there. It's just a way to speed that up. Change my color, I don't like that yellow. Boom. Now, most of these layers came with masks already, and that's kind of what we're working up into. I'll hold off on that a little bit. Each layer has its own, each layer has its own blending mode. These are ways to kind of add images together in a sense, or multiply images together. So all the colors, you can kind of multiply them together, or you can add them together. So if I have this black and white pattern over top of my solid color, what I can do is maybe set this grunge. See, I have the grunge selected, pattern 1, and I can hover and go through the different math modes of blending this pattern down onto whatever's underneath it. And so if I darken it, it's going to take only the dark colors. If I multiply it, it literally is multiplying the pixel values. So generally everything gets darker because 1 in a digital space, 1 in a digital world is white and 0 is black. And so there's nothing over 1. So if we're multiplying any pixel underneath 1, we're getting less value. You multiply 1 by a mid-gray, which would be like 0.5, your answer is 0.5. So it went from white to gray. Color burn, usually don't use these. Lighten screen retains all your whites, all of your bright pixels, so it cuts out all the darks. This one adds everything, so kind of, not a multiply, but now we're taking the pixels and we're adding it. So if you have a white, if you have a mid-gray pixel, 0.5, and you're adding a white pixel, which is a value of 1, you're getting 1.5, but the computer doesn't know 1.5, so it's going to give you full white, which would just be 1. So it literally adds the pixels together. And overlay is a good one for kind of cutting out your darks and cutting out your brights, and giving you all your midtones. Soft light is really just a softer version of overlay. But yeah, blending modes, these are great. They can be fun, they can be helpful. Yeah. You can lock things in here. So if you accidentally keep bumping your layers, like a pattern here, or maybe the solid, I'm going to go to my move tool. This is up here at the top. Move tool. You can hit V on your keyboard. I do this a lot. V on my keyboard. And I can drag these images around, or I can drag these layers around. To convert your background layer, if you want to get rid of it, you can either hit backspace, but if it's your only layer on here, you have to double click it to convert it from a background layer to a regular layer, and then you can do as you please with it. We can lock layers. It's kind of where I was getting with this. I need to unlock a basic layer. See how I move this around. If you don't want to accidentally do that, it's what these are up here. These are a bunch of different locks. So let's see. Oh, there they are. I'm sorry. Lock button. Lock that move. And so now, and it'll give you this little dialog box. yell at you every time you try to touch it now. So no, you can't do that because it's locked. So that's a way to lock it, or lock specifically the move, but you can still paint on it. Now if you want to lock the paint, there's actually a lock paint here too. So now it will let you paint on it or lock it or move it. Prevent auto nesting. That's a weird one. We're not going to get into artboards, or you can just lock all. So there you go. There's an automatic lock all button for a layer. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, go to brush. Let's turn off our locks. And when you right click when you're in the brush, you get, if you have brushes, if you have custom brushes, you also have some default Photoshop brushes in there too that I've deleted out, but this is where you can see all your brushes, all your brush presets. And if you click on the little settings box in the top corner, you can change how some of these show up. So if I do if I turn brush name on, we got brush names in here now. You can turn on brush stroke and it'll show you what it looks like with the stroke. I like to keep mine pretty simple, just a brush tip shape. Maybe I'm going to pick a grunge brush. That's how you kind of change your brushes. I'm going to clear all this color. I'll fill it with black. There we go. Let's see. I'm going to grab all my layers here and actually delete them. And you can do that one by one by hitting backspace. If you highlight that layer, hit backspace. Or you can select them all and drag them down into the little trash can at the bottom. The new layer button, if you want a brand new empty layer, not a solid fill layer, it's different. And it's just an empty layer, we can hit this little plus button down here in the bottom right hand corner. Something to note, all these layer adjustments, or even the new fill layer, solid color, pattern fill, you can actually find all of these hue saturation levels, all of these adjustment layers can be found on the layer panel at the bottom right. And so we can do a basic new layer. You can group on folders, so if I select both these layers and hit group, you can get a group here. If you double click that group, you can name it. So we'll name this organization. And you can open that group with the little down arrow right there. But all of these, this is where you can find all those adjustment layers. It's this little half and half pie, circle, pizza, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's that little thing. And so you can add brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, all of those from here. Solid colors here as well, pattern fill. Now, the last thing, one of the last big kind of topics I want to talk about here is masking, and there's a lot of different ways to mask. And students, when they first kind of get into Photoshop, masking can kind of be a difficult concept at first. And so I'm going to explain it to you like you're a 3D artist and you're texturing. And so for me, I would call this, we're going to create like a material, if you will. Like say we're going to paint a fire hydrant, and that fire hydrant has layers to it, right? It has paint on, you have the underneath, which would be metal. Then you have paint on that, and then you maybe even have another paint layer on that, and they're different colors. So I'm going to call this fire hydrant. That's my group folder. And if you wanted, we could even say material, fire hydrant material. And I'm just going to backspace delete these layers out of here. Now we got nothing in here. That's what that these little checker boxes mean. You have no information in here. And then I'm going to do some solid colors in here. So I'm going to say solid color. And we get a brand new solid color in here, and I'm going to imagine that we're texturing a fire hydrant, and I'm going to give that base, very base material. We got a gray, like a grayish metal, and I would say okay. And then I would go over here and name this. We'll call this metal. And then I'm going to add a couple more of those. You can keep going down here and back up to solid color, or you can hold Alt on your keyboard and then drag one of these layers up. And you see I get this little bar telling me where I want to place it. And then it'll copy it. It's kind of like if you're in a 3D program, it's a quick shortcut to shift, you know, like 3ds Max would be shift drag to duplicate something. And then we're going to name this. First we'll change the color. So if we got that metal, we're going to put the paint on top. I want kind of a fire hydrant red. Say okay. I'm going to call this paint red. And then I'll alt drag that layer. And I'm going to put another paint layer on this. And I'm going to do a yellow paint, because in my world this fire hydrant has been painted a couple of times. Like they do, they come by and they repaint these fire hydrants several times over when they get too ugly. And I'm gonna drag my, well, let's name that paint yellow. I'm gonna drag that paint red above my paint yellow, because I want a red fire hydrant in the end. Now, each one of these solid fills, when you create an adjustment layer, they automatically come with masks, and that's what these little white boxes are out to the side. And if we click on this white box, we activate the mask. You need to pay attention to that little box hovering around these. That's that's how you know where you're painting. Or if you have your channels visible, sometimes they're not, you can kind of see what you're painting on. And so if you want to paint the mask, you want to take away the paint, you need to make sure you're on the mask. You can view the mask by hitting Alt. You Alt click that layer mask, and it will allow you to preview this layer mask. You just got to not forget that you're in that preview mode. You got to Alt click it again to get back out of it. Now, I got a brush here. I'm going to my brush palette. I'm going to pick something grungy, and I'm going to make sure that my colors here, I actually had a bunch of different colors on my foreground and background color here. And if you ever need to change these back to just a generic, see, we look. So I'll go here, I got these colors. Whoa, something's going on. Here we go. X. There we go. So if we have a bunch of colors in these swatches down here, a quick way to reset that to black and white is just to hit D on your keyboard, and that's the default colors. And you can get black and white, and then you can hit X to flip back and forth between black and white. And that method, make sure you default your colors, and then X to flip-flop back and forth while you're inside of the brush mode. So I gotta activate my mask. I'm going to hit D to reset my colors, and I'm going to switch to black to paint away, or to mask away that paint. So we're masking that paint, and now you can see we have that yellow paint underneath the red paint. So let's go get another brush here, maybe this one's better. There we go. It's kind of like paint chips. What I'm doing there, I'm actually holding Alt and I'm right clicking to change my brush size. Or oh, that's a good one. You can do bracket up and bracket down. It's a good way to change your brush size too. I think this is just a little more fluid sometimes. You just got to be careful, because you can also accidentally change the opacity if you're dragging up and down. Side to side is the size, up and down is the opacity. So drag and change my size. There we go. And I'm going to mask away that red paint. And I'm flipping back and forth with my X command to go from white to black. Black takes away, white makes it visible. Okay. So I'm able to quickly flip back and forth between here, and as I subtract and add, I create different kind of looking paint effects, grunge effects. So I'm kind of add in where I want and take away where I want. Now, okay, and I'm gonna go down to the yellow paint. And I made sure to click that mask. I'm on paint. I'm on the yellow paint mask. Go to black, and I'm gonna take away some yellow paint. And now if I do it over here, you can't see it because I didn't mask that part away on the red paint. So I'm erasing the yellow paint underneath here, and you can kind of see it on the thumbnail, but we don't see it here. The only way we're seeing through is if we've masked away both the red paint and the yellow paint, and now we can see that metal underneath. So this is how you can start getting some of these layered effects. It starts to look like chip paint. Now the brush helps a lot, but you can see how we can start to very quickly kind of layer up different effects. Okay, now if I mask away the metal, there's nothing underneath it. It goes to transparent pixels, and we don't want to do that. So that's general masking, and if we want to view these masks, like I said earlier, we can Alt and take a look at that, and that's previewing it. Now I can Alt click the next one. That's previewing that yellow paint mask. And now say somebody showed up and they said, man, this fire hydrant's ugly, let's add another one, another paint layer. So I'm going to say solid color. I'm going to pick a blue. Yep, say OK. And I'm going to call this paint new blue. And we got that white mask right there. You can do some things here. We can right click and we can disable the mask, which doesn't do anything for us right now. Enable. You can delete the mask, so there's no mask on it. Let's actually turn this one off so you can see how this works on the others. Disable. Right click, disable layer mask. So, oh, I deleted it. Disable. So it's not gone, but it's almost like it's off. It's the off button. You can go back and you enable if you want it back. Or you can do delete. You can delete it. Control Z to undo. You can add mask to a selection. So that just means to kind of turn all your white pixels into a selection. You can also do that by control clicking that mask. And that gives you a selection of all your white pixels. I'm actually going to delete the red mask, so I'm going to delete that mask and show you how you can copy a mask. Like I showed you earlier with layers, duplicating the layers. So if I Alt drag a layer, it duplicates it. I can do that with a mask as well. So if I hold Alt and I make sure to grab that mask and drag up to the next layer where I've deleted that mask off the paint layer, the red paint layer, and I let go, it duplicates that mask for me and puts it on another layer. And I can do that on the blue layer too. So if I hold Alt and I drag up onto that solid white layer, mask layer, it's going to ask me, do you want to replace this layer mask? And we say yes. And then maybe we could go in here and just tear away a little bit more off of that blue. Like that. And then maybe I go down to that red paint layer and I take away a little bit of that red. Okay, masking. It's kind of masking 101. Now, I'm actually going to delete the layer off of the blue mask and show you a way you can create your own mask from a selection. And so, like I showed you earlier, the marquee tool, we go in here and select a box, drag a box, drag a selection box. I can go over to this panel here, I'm sorry, this solid color paint layer, and I'm going to add a mask based off of this selection. And so at the very bottom, you're going to see a white rectangle with a circle in it. In fact, just to drill this into your brain, photographic memory here, I'm going to use a circle too. So I did a circle select, and I'm going to go down to the bottom of the layer panel, and I'm going to say new mask. That's what this button is. If I hover over it, add layer mask, and it's this add layer mask is going to take into consideration my selection. So if I run that, you can see it actually used the inverse of my selection. So it made my selection white pixels and made every other unselected a black pixel. I can invert that mask by holding Control and doing, I have to make sure I have that layer mask highlighted. You see how it's highlighted? I hit Control I, and it's going to invert that mask for me. It's a quick way to invert that mask. I could do that on all these others too. So like the red one, underneath it, Control I, I can invert it. Do that with the yellow paint layer, Control I, invert it. Or do it again. Let's go backwards. Okay. And then after I created that based off of that selection, I can go in here and paint over it. And now it looks like some kind of sticker maybe. And because this is a solid color, I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, I was going to say, because it's a solid color, you could change the color of that and then it's going to stay within that mask. So that's kind of one of the cool things about these solid colors, is that they're quote-unquote non-destructive. And so at any time I can go back in and change these colors. The reason why I wanted to change it is because I thought this kind of looked like a sticker. I'm actually changing the size of that. So I did Control T to transform. You got to be careful, that's next to the Control Y hotkey. Control Y is a dangerous hotkey. Make sure you're not touching Control Y. It's a CMYK checker, and I don't know if y'all can see that, but when I run that, you can see at the top of my document here, CMYK, that's for print. We don't want to do that because it washes out our colors while we're working. So I'm going to turn that off. But it's next to Control T, and it happens all the time. And Control T will give me this little box here that I can kind of transform. And I'm going to make this look like a little sticker or something. And then hit Enter. Okay. Delete that layer mask. I think I want to change back to blue. That's another masking thing to understand. Here's an interesting one. And this doesn't, I'm actually gonna hide everything here, and I'm gonna do a new layer. It's a new empty layer. And I'm just gonna fill it with white. So really I'm just creating a background. I want to show you something called Quick Mask, which is it's just kind of like selecting with a brush. So you already know how to select with a rectangle tool. Well, what if I wanted to select in a fancy way, right? We want to do fancy selection, paint it where we want to select. Maybe you're having trouble selecting something. Maybe the lasso tool's not working for you. This is too polygonish. Maybe the lasso one's too fluid and it's hard to get in there and select things. You can also paint a selection, and the way you do that is by hitting Q on your keyboard, and you'll see your layer turn red, just to kind of let you know that you're in quick mask mode. Now there's no mask on this layer, okay? This is an invisible mask. You can think of it like a transparency sheet above the whole document, where I hit Q, and this is the button over here on the toolbar right under your colors. It's quick mask mode, so you can see when I mash on Q a whole bunch, it flips back and forth between that quick mask button. Okay, so I'm gonna turn on quick mask. We know it's active because my layer's red. I'm gonna hit B to go into my brush. And I'm gonna just start with something basic, like a round brush. And now, we gotta paint. It works like a regular mask. It looks like we're painting red, right? I'll hit X again. I can subtract some of that. Make my brush bigger with Alt right click. And maybe I fill in all of this down here. I'm gonna hit my X and swap my color. And do this, maybe even sign my name. Right? And then now when I hit Q and I leave quick mask mode, it's going to give me a special selection. Wow, pretty cool, right? Yeah. And so why this can be helpful is it's kind of like an invisible layer mask. You don't have to add a mask to make a mask. If you want to paint something and then really this could be used for so many things. You could paint into the selection, or we could go down to our now empty blue layer mask and say create new mask, and now it created a mask out of our selection. I know that's kind of weird. We used quick mask to paint a selection so that we could create a mask on a layer. I hope that makes sense. We're getting a little bit Inception-ish mask inception here. But quick mask is just another little handy feature, right? So I'm gonna quick mask again. I'm gonna hit Q to leave quick mask, and if I wanted, I could Control I to invert that selection. I'm sorry, Control Shift I to invert that selection. And so I know it's kind of hard to see this, but right now there's no little dancing. They call these marching ants. There's no marching ants on the outside of the document, but if I Control Shift I when I have a selection, it flips my selection, and now I have marching ants on the outside, and so I inverted my selection. That's how you can kind of tell. And then maybe I preview my mask. I'm going to say Alt View, and then I'm going to use this selection to fill into my mask layer. So I just did a fill white with Alt Backspace. You see how Photoshop can start getting really powerful and really quick. I'm going to show you one more thing. I'm going to create a new pattern. So I'm going to use a pattern. I'm going to pick a grunge. Oh wait, actually first, let's do our quick mask again. So I'm going to turn on my white layer so you can see what I'm doing. Hit Q. Go into quick mask. You can see it's activated because it's red. Now I'm gonna grab a brush, and I'm gonna go in here and create some quick mask nonsense, right? I'm selecting, right? Quick mask selecting. And then I'm gonna hit Q to leave quick mask, and now I have a selection. And then now if I go down to solid, create a layer, any one of these I run, or any one of these that I create, is going to take into consideration my selection, my quick mask selection that I just made. And so if I do pattern, you can see that it auto created a pattern fill over here, and it auto made my mask, a new mask for me, based off of my selection. There we go, cool, grunge. And now maybe I want that inverted, so I can highlight that mask over there and Control I to invert that mask. And now maybe I want to paint on that and take some of it away. Maybe that's too much, right? Or maybe I'm taking it away too quickly. Maybe I want it to be softer, right? And fade it away. So I can go up to my brush settings up here on that top toolbar and turn my opacity down. Maybe to 30%. And now you can see I can start to fade some of that away as I paint. This is all non-destructive workflows. Okay, if you're used to old painting applications or old painting mentality, you've been likely destructive editing. Okay, and so maybe you're thinking like, well, how do I erase? I want you to forget the word erase. Okay, we don't erase anymore. We work in a team, and other people might touch this file, and we don't want to break things. We don't want to destroy things. We want to make it easy on us. And so I'm going to right click disable that mask, and you can see my pattern is still here, right? I didn't erase it. It's not gone forever. I masked it. Okay. Let's go ahead and hide that. Let's turn on our paint or our fire hydrant. And then we can actually change kind of last thing. I'm bouncing back and forth here, but opacity on a layer. You can change the opacity on a layer. Now there are lots of other things in here. Vectors, you can add shapes. You can add text if you're the text tool. I'm sure you guys have used a text tool before. Blah, blah, blah. You can drag a box and it constrains the text. And let's see. I think I covered a good chunk of stuff in here. Oh, I know what we can do. Last couple of things here. Let's hide some of these layers. I do want my grunge though. And I'm going to delete the mask off the grunge. Delete. So let's take a look at some other non-destructive tools here. If I double click on the layer, not double click on, if you double click the lettering, it's going to allow you to rename. If you double click out just on the little box for the layer, this whole little sure, box. Click on you double click on the layer itself. You're going to get some extra settings in here. And the only thing I really want you to pay attention to, and these are just, you have opacity, it's the same thing. It's kind of some repeat settings, and there are some other more advanced controls in here. And really the only thing I want you to take a look at is this blend if right here. And blend if is fun because you can kind of non-destructively erase things based on values. And so maybe I want to erase, we're going to do it on this layer. Maybe I want to erase so if I pull this up, see, as I pull this up and it meets those values, it starts to erase. It's not really erasing, it's a blend if. It blends it if this color or more, or this color or less. It's going to blend it. It's another little fancy, I don't know, you'd call it masking, but kind of the same idea. And so if I blend if to here, and I say okay, you can see my pattern is still there. There's no mask on it. It's still there. And I could even double click on that mask. that pattern. Double click on that pattern, and I can go in here and change the pattern. And that blend if is still doing its thing. So it's erasing values based on that blend if. So I go back in here, double click, and I could turn that blend if down. Now let's choose a little more friendly pattern to demonstrate this next thing, maybe like this. Double click, go to that blend if again, and I pull this value up. Now you can see how this is kind of looks a bit pixelated. If I hold Alt, it'll split that blend, and now it softens it. So I have a tendency to mash it back down. I have a tendency to pull it up to where I got most of the stuff that I want gone, kind of most of it's gone, like that. And then I go, okay, that looks pretty good. It's kind of where I want it. And then I hold Alt, and I split that blend if, and now it fades. right? This can be really handy. So blend diff was a good one. I don't know. Oh, layer styles. That would be the last thing that I kind of want to talk to you guys about. Okay, layer styles. Oh no, I want my fire hydrant. Let's bring it back. Okay. I'm gonna get rid of my blue layer. And I'm gonna get rid of one of these yellow layers. I'm gonna get rid of the blue. Yeah, let's just get rid of the whole thing. And we're gonna go back down to our two. Whoops. Oh, that's tab, by the way. To hide all your tools, tab on your keyboard. And then if you're in brush mode, since I just did that by accident, let's talk about this one too. Okay. You see when I'm in a brush, I have this little outline of the brush. Yeah. If yours disappears, it's caps lock. Okay. See, I still have it. But if I hit caps lock, it hides that brush preview. It's because some of these can get kind of wild. An example would be maybe this one. You see I have this large brush here that can be kind of annoying while you're trying to use it. So some people like to hit caps lock to hide it so they can paint and it not get in the way of what they're looking at. Caps lock. It's a good one. Caps lock and tab can throw people off sometimes. Okay. On brush. Delete that layer. Now layer styles. Just to be simple about this, I'm gonna let's clean out this mask. I'm gonna fill it with white. Alt backspace. Click that layer. Alt backspace. I filled it. And yeah. And then I'm gonna make just kind of a more simple mask because what we had previously was a bit wild. Wild. There we go. Oh, let's turn our opacity back up. There we go. That's kind of what I want to do. I'm going to do a little bit more opacity on this side. Alright. Then we'll do a little bit more. Do it softer. So you can see I'm kind of creating subtlety here for what I'm going to illustrate next. Subtlety. So we have some hard edges over here, and then we have some subtlety. Let's do something real kind of. Ooh, let's do some tears. Yeah, back on 100%. Some tears. Let's do some writing. Let's say JJ was here. Okay. And then we're going to add some layer styles. And that's the effects button down here. Now there are a couple of ways to get to this. You can do it through this button down here, say effects, or you can right click or actually go to that double click like we did earlier to change the blend diffs, and over here on the left you have all of your layer effects or layer styles as they call them. And I mean things like stroke, so all you gotta do is turn these little check boxes on, and now this is affected. This is going to be affected by the layer. So you can add strokes. But let's do this one by one. So I'm gonna get out of there. I'm gonna go down here, say effects. I'm gonna add a stroke, and you can see it pulls us back into that window here, and it automatically turned stroke on for us. And you can see under that paint layer, that red paint layer, there's now an effects, and then underneath that effects there's a stroke. And so if you ever need to get back to these, say we hit OK, and you want to get back to that specific stroke, you can double click on stroke and it'll take you to the settings for that stroke. And now so let's talk about some of these settings. So I can change the size of that stroke. I can change, you see how it's kind of on the outside of everything that we painted. It says inside, that's just because of the way the mask is. And in fact, maybe we should just simplify it. Alt-I, I'm going to invert my mask. There we go. Back to stroke. Just so this makes a little more sense. There we go. So that's on the inside. In fact, maybe we should, yeah, I'm going to do it. Paint something a little more harsh, kind of fill in some of this. Or this would be a good example to show you that you can edit masks. So I could do like a levels on a mask. If I'm going to preview this mask so you can see what's happening. But I could hit Control L to bring up a levels, and then I could crush these levels and kind of change the brightness contrast, if you will, on that mask. I'm gonna get back out of here and kind of show you what I'm doing as I do that. So Control L, I'm still on that mask, and there's a stroke on here. I fade it that way, or if I kind of add more whites, there we go. That's kind of why I went into this. Okay, so I'm gonna pull that down like that. And now we're gonna go back into the stroke and talk about these settings. So it's set to inside, and so it's putting a stroke on the inside of our image, and as we change that size, this is by pixels, it's a pixel amount, we turn that pixel amount up, our stroke gets larger. We'll change the position to the outside, and now we're putting that stroke on the outside of what we painted. Or you can put it in the center. And it's based off of the center, and it goes in both directions. I'm going to uncheck stroke, and I'm going to turn on drop shadow. Drop shadow, there it is at the bottom. There we go, we got a drop shadow. Go to our drop shadow settings, got to highlight it. And turn our opacity up and make this look real ugly. Turn the spread down, or I guess it would be the spread up. Spread up. Change the size of that. And we can change how far the distance is. It's like how far the shadow travels away from the original object. If I turn this, changes the direction, the light direction almost. I'm going to fade that. Let me turn the opacity down on it, change the shadow color if we wanted to. Yep. Another good one is inner shadow. So got to highlight inner shadow. And it's kind of the same thing, just on the inside, just for creating a different look, you know, so. Kind of like we're looking through some cut paper. There we go. Distance. Size. There we go. Layer styles. Now, with enough understanding of layer styles, you can start to get into creating presets for layer styles. So there's some presets over here. One example is like a rust preset. So if I do a rust, and so I put that rust on here, and we have, it's made out of two things. We got a stroke, which is using a gradient on the stroke. That's something I didn't really talk about. I kind of glossed over. But you can change it from color, like we were doing earlier, to gradient. And we can use some of those gradients that I showed you previously. So I could pick like a gradient color and use a stroke that has multiple colors. But these are presets, right? So this one's made out of bevel and emboss, and then some strokes. And bevel and emboss is a good one if used in subtle ways. It kind of puts ramps on the edges of whatever you painted, and you can change the direction of this so it looks like it's going in or out or up or down, as I say. You can change the depth. make it look real gross. If you keep it subtle enough, one, no soften. Technique will be changed to chisel hard, or maybe chisel soft. Inner bevel, outer bevel. Pillow emboss is the default, puts it on kind of everything in a soft manner. But it's just a way to kind of add some extra, real minimal extra detail. You just got to be subtle with it. You can change the opacity of each one of these, the highlight and the darken, so you can get rid of one. You can change the direction, light direction. It just kind of makes it look like it was kind of like some paint that was peeled upward. I say, okay, actually I want to invert my mask back, so we're back to looking at paint that was chipped away. So if we wanted to kind of make it look like this was chipped paint, bevel emboss, just a smidge. Change the up, turn it to up, no, turn it to down. Let's make sure it's on the right side. Yep. And I usually do it by like 1 pixel if I'm going to do it at all. And I keep this opacity real soft. Turn the depth down. Probably want more shadow than highlight. There we go. Now you can see it starts to look like it was kind of peeled upward. And now what's cool about these layer styles is that they're non-destructive. And so if I wanted to go in here and continue painting, I can now preview this effect while I'm painting. Let's go on my mask. There we go. That's a little too soft. Maybe I want something that looks a little more chipped. Like maybe this one. Yeah. There we go. You see how it almost starts to bubble the paint, which is a really cool effect. And the more I continue painting, the more obvious it becomes. Right. Layer styles. And at any point I could go in and change these effects. Like this is a rust effect and it's really on the wrong side. Really the rust should be on the inside of the paint, like underneath where the metal is. And so maybe let's just go into our inner glow here. Just make sure. Okay. Just gonna save this gradient real quick. Save this preset. Call this rust. And I'm gonna turn off inner glow, and we're gonna go down to the outer glow, and I'm gonna load that gradient I just saved. Which where did it go? Well, bonkers. That's fine, we'll pick a different one. Like that one. There we go. So we got this rust on the inside now. And then we'll say we could dial. Yep. Dial in some of that, which is way too much. Precise. Turn the size down. Yep, that's what I wanted. Size up, size up, size up, size up, size up. I'm hitting the up and down arrows on my keyboard to just turn this up a little bit. There we go. And so you can see how we can start to design grunges in a way. Layer styles. And actually, if you create these layer styles, all you gotta do is come over here and say, well, I think you gotta double click. They changed how you do this. New style, I think is how you do it. And so you just gotta go into this effects, double click on effects and say new style, and you can name this style. Saying blah, 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 blah. Say okay. And it looks like, there it is at the bottom here. We have a new preset. And so if you spend time, you create a bunch of presets in here for different effects, different kinds of things. Yeah. Well, I think that's long enough for this crash course. I hope I got enough information in for you guys. I'm not quite sure how long this video was, but I feel like I covered most of the important things for a beginner texture artist. Yes, these days you're probably going to hear a lot of people talking about Substance Painter, and I absolutely agree you should be in Substance Painter, but when I start to teach texturing, I like to start kids out in Photoshop, because it is really it's the traditional software, and I'm not trying to make you guys just button pushers. I'm here to teach you knowledge and theory, and I want you to understand so that how traditional painting applications work, so that when you get into these fancy 3D painting applications, you understand what's kind of going on under the hood, because these new fancy 3D painting applications are very much using a lot of these same ideas that I just showed you, like masking, kind of like layer style stuff. Like all this stuff can be done in these new painting applications, but I didn't want to I don't like to overwhelm students with dumping them in a 3D painter and then them not knowing, and understanding kind of what's going on under the hood. So I hope that was helpful. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up. Thanks for watching.